Welcome to the Amelia Shirt video tutorials and sew along. I'm Jennifer with Anna Lane and I'm excited to get started. I am personally in some desperate need for some transitional clothing from fall into winter, so the Amelia Shirt is a wonderful, perfect option for that. First thing you're going to want to do, of course, is to make sure that you print out your pattern. Now, our patterns come in several different formats. This particular design comes in a US letter, 8.5 inch by 11 inch, an A4 international paper format, and also an AO copy shop format. So I myself am going to be using the AO with layers, and I'm going to be sending the file from my computer screen to my projector that's mounted above my cutting table. I'm going to project the pattern onto my fabric, and I'm going to do my grading and my cutting all in one swoop without even needing to print a page. So some of our newer designs, actually all of our newer designs, do have an actual projector file format. But as long as the design has an AO copy shop format, which all of ours do, the projector file is a convenience, not a necessity. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Okay, let's talk pattern assembly. Now, if you've never assembled an Anna Lane pattern, our patterns are unique in that they are an edge-to-edge pattern with absolutely no overlap and no trimming. So there are a number of benefits to this. First, how quickly you can assemble it, and also the ease of storage of the pattern afterwards. So what you're going to want to do, now page 1 of your pattern file is going to be an assembly guide. And the assembly guide does talk about it being edge to edge and how to actually assemble it. But one thing it does also say is that printers have internal margins, of course. So they're not going to print all the way to the edge of the paper, but that gap is okay. It's actually, we're expecting that gap to happen, so it's built into the pattern. So all you need to do is you need to take your pages and butt them up against each other with absolutely no overlap, and then tape them in place. Now, it's very important that you print your patterns actual size and do not print to scale, because it will throw things off. So here you can see first that now that we've assembled it correctly, we can just fold the pages very easily. And then of course go ahead and assemble it according to the guide and the map that's provided in the assembly guide. So now if you do not print your pattern actual size, and in this case I scaled it at 100%, I want to show you the difference. So you see here when we butt the pages up against one another that the lines don't match. And so it's very, very important to get into the habit of just printing actual size. And then of course check your control square and finish assembling, and we're good to go. Okay, so I have my projector all set up. I have my fabric that is folded right sides together so that I can project onto the lightest side of the fabric and see the lines much better. Now you probably can't see it from the video, but I promise the lines are there and they are visible to be able to cut out. So now all I have to do is I have to get my pattern weights ready and my rotary cutter. Now I love rotary cutters, I prefer them to scissors, but I always struggle to find the right pattern weights. So I finally found one that worked really, really well for me. Now, if you're like me and you like to drink wine while you sew, I do have a tip if you want to use your lovely wine as pattern weights. First, make sure that you have small tumbler glasses like I do, because you certainly don't want to knock it over and mess up your fabric. And second, make sure that you don't pour it over your fabric, because if you're clumsy like me, you'll spill it also. So now I'm ready. Let's go ahead and cut this out. And I'm going to cut the high-low front. Here we go. And now move my lovely pattern weights out of the way. And here we go. I think I need to change rotary cutter blade, so it's not very sharp. So I need to go and make sure all those straggling fabric fibers get cut. I should probably actually go off camera and change my rotary blade. It's just not something that I do very often. I don't know why. Well, to be honest, It's been a little while since I've sewn. I kind of lost my sojo there during quarantine for a while. There we go. Wow, that was a terrible demonstration. Okay, but you get the idea. So now I have the front pattern piece cut out and on to the back. Now time for the back piece. After changing my rotary blade. Much better. All right. Look at that, smooth as butter. And finally, I'm going to cut out the neckband. Now, one thing I want to mention about the neckband is I am using a sweater knit, and sweater knits are typically a no-no for neckbands because they lack the recovery needed to really keep the neckline in shape. However, this particular sweater knit actually has a really good bounce back. It has a really good recovery. So, man, I'm gonna just throw caution to the wind and give it a shot. Now, I want to make sure that I have my stripes lined up perfectly because I don't want to have like a part stripe and a part not stripe. Although I suppose if I cut it on the bias that might be a neat option, but alas, I shan't do anything too difficult today. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut my neckband actually slightly wider, which is going to be about 1/4 of an inch wider, and just use this actual, the actual stripe itself on this fabric. And the reason why I'm gonna do that is because I'm using a sweater knit. I wanna make sure that if I mess up, if it stretches a little bit out of shape, that it'll still work. But if you're not using a sweater knit, certainly no need to do this. But I'm just gonna increase my neckband width slightly. Make sure I don't have any issues. And ultimately, the only difference that will happen is that my neckline will be just 1/8 of an inch taller than what the design intended for. So now let me cut out this length correctly, which is about right here. And I am good to go. So time to get started with sewing, our favorite part. First thing I'm going to do is I have a scrap piece of sweater knit, and I am going to make sure that my differential is correct on my sewing machine, or on my serger. See, that is not correct. See how that looks. And let me try one more piece. that differential looks good. Time to get sewing. So there are guide markers on your pattern piece for the front of the shirt to line up with the shortest end of the sleeve. So what I mean by that is, this is the front bodice, front shirt. And you see here, actually let me move this out of the way. You see here on the sleeve, there is a short straight line and there's a longer straight line. And it's the short one that lines up with the front. So I have the wrong piece here, and there are guide markers on the pattern. And the guides do not indicate exact placement. They simply indicate what piece goes with which one. Oh wait, I'm still mixed up with my pieces. Here we go. There we go, short end. And I'm gonna go ahead and pin this in place. Excuse my funny nail polish if anybody's noticed. I loved it, but my sister told me it was ridiculous. But what does she know? I saw it on Pinterest and I really liked it. Okay, so I typically don't use pins when I sew, or even if I do, I only use them in a couple strategic places. You know, sweater knit's a bit different, of course, because it shifts a lot easier, it has a much looser weave to it, and it's a little bit more difficult to control with your serger, or especially with your sewing machine. So I would definitely recommend taking the time to pin it enough. Here we go. Front of the bodice, line up the diagonal with the shortest diagonal on the sleeve, right sides together. Sweater knit also does stretch out quite a bit, so another good reason to make sure that you are pinning. I don't particularly have too hard of a time with like a double brush poly stretching or shifting that much, but you know, everybody's different. Certainly everybody has their sewing preferences. But this is what works for me. I also recently got these, they're not pins and they're not clips, but you're supposed to be able to sew over them. And I actually haven't even pulled them out of the box yet. Not quite sure how they'd work, but I'll give you a review on them once I do. Off my tails on my serger threads. However, I'm not going to in this case because it is a loose weave on this fabric and the threads blend in really well. So I'm just going to incorporate the ends of these into my next seams. And so now I'm going to take my other sleeve end. So this is of course the long side of the sleeve. And I'm going to take my back bodice and I'm going to place them right sides together and go ahead and sew these up as well. Raglans are really, really easy. And I really think that the biggest time commitment is cutting out your fabric. Printing it out most certainly. But for raglans, they are a very, very, very quick sew. Now there is a cold shoulder option that is in this design. I'm not doing the cold shoulder option, of course, because this is for fall and winter sewing right now, but it is a very, very easy construction for the cold shoulder. All you're doing is you're putting a binding around the opening for the cold shoulder, and the photo tutorials in our tutorial with the pattern are very, very clear. If you have any questions about that, go ahead and post a comment below. As we start getting closer to spring, I'll do a separate tutorial just for that sleeve. Remove those pins. You can remove them as you sew too if you'd like. And so now I just need to close this garment along the sleeves, and I'm going to put the second sleeve. Okay, let me straighten this out a little bit. Right sides together, the other sleeve end, right sides together with this back bodice. Let's see what happens if I don't pin this. I'll probably regret it, but oh my gosh, there's nothing worse than seam ripping sweater knit. Just realign. There we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at I was going to say wrist, but this isn't really the wrist. This is mid-arm, mid-forearm. And I'm going to start from the end of the sleeve here, and I'm going to sew through the underarm and all the way down the side seam. And if this all works out perfectly as I planned, I will have a perfect straight match along the front and back of the shirt. So a tip that I have is if you're not tying off your serger threads, go ahead and just tie the front and the back threads under the arm so that you can make sure that it doesn't shift in that particular spot. So go ahead and snip that off. Let me sew this seam. Okay, straight match. So if I'm using contrasting fabric on the inside of a garment, I'll honestly probably tie off those serger threads and be more concerned about it because I like to have a nice finish on the inside. But again, because of this loose weave, not that big of a deal. I have two small children, so I save time where I can. So now we have that side seam sewn, and let me trim that excess, and I'm going to go ahead and switch to the other side and do the exact same thing. Just straight match here. should have also noted in the beginning that I disengaged my, my blade on my serger. And the reason why I do that is, honestly, I find it a whole heck of a lot easier. Sometimes, you know, while you're turning corners, you can gouge into your fabric, and it's just certainly not my thing. So we are going to go ahead and work on the next neckband next. Okay, so now it's time for the neckband. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to first make sure that you fold your neckband in half right sides together, and we're going to sew up this short end here so that we create a continuous circle with our neckband. Okay, so now that that's done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a little snip here, and I'm going to snip the seam allowance right in the center of this band. And I'm going to go ahead, and this is going to make for less bulk at the seam. So I'm going to push one of the seams one way and the other way, and I'm going to fold it in half, and that's really going to reduce a lot of bulk. And I'm going to place a pin right here along that stitching. So now you're going to go ahead and fold everything else in half, wrong sides together, so that your fabric is showing. I want to place a pin at the halfway mark of the neckband, just like that, okay? So now I'm going to go ahead and trim some of this thread because I don't need it. Again, I'm not going to bother with finishing it off. And now I'm going to pull out my sweater itself, or shirt, or sweater shirt. And I'm going to take note of the center of the back neckline and also the center of the front neckline. Now, you could always have marked this ahead of time, but you know, I typically always eyeball it because it's not that difficult to see. So here, especially with my stripes, it's actually very easy for me to see where my centers are. So I'm going to take where my seam is, and I'm going to put that along the back center neckline, like this. This is going to be right sides together, so I'm working on the inside of my inside out garment. And then the center, the front is right about here. Take this pin, and I'm going to put it through all the layers. And so now, what I like to do to make sure I kind of get an even stretch is I kind of hold it with my finger right over here on this side. And I kind of eyeball where it would be about halfway, and it looks to be about there. Now, neckbands, you can get into some great exact science with it, but the main things that you want to do is to make sure that you have an even stretch throughout your neckband when you attach it to your neckline. So whatever works best for you to be able to achieve that, you can pin a million different pins. You could only do 2 pins. It really just depends on what works for your style, and everybody's different. If you're struggling with neckbands, I just encourage you to keep going and to keep trying. So this looks pretty good, and I'm going to go ahead and start sewing. So now, it is recommended that you have your band on top when you serge, so that your feed dogs are against the neckline itself and your presser foot is against the band. And that just helps you to control it a lot better because you're going to be stretching slightly as you sew. So let's get this lined up. And I'm going to carefully snip off some of this excess. And I'm going to stretch it slightly, and then I'm just going to go slow. Okay, I'm almost to my second pin, so I'm going to snip this thread. And I'm going to just position this band, and I'm really glad I added a little bit more height because this weave on this sweater knit is so loose that it's definitely kind of sucking in the height of the neckband a little bit, which I kind of expected. Okay, now on to this. There we go, now the last little bit. Now we have our neckband attached to our shirt, or my shirt. And let me make sure that I didn't skip anything, that there are no gaps in here, that nothing kind of misfed, and it all looks good. So up next is hemming. Here to finish up the hem, and again, like I said before, it is a 1-inch seam allowance, and for me, I know that my finger is the perfect gauge because from the tip of my finger to the first knuckle, it is 1 inch, or certainly close enough than for me to need to use a seam gauge. And with stripes, it can be a little tricky because it's a little deceiving to the eye. You're not going in that straight line. But if there is a will, there is a way. Now you could also not be lazy like me and just pin it. But I have small children and it is easier for me to just be as efficient as I can. Almost done with the front. There we go. Off to the back. Sorry, my seam ripper's running away from me. Okay, so now I just need to pull those ends up. Oh man, that was a lot easier than the last disaster. Okay. And there we go. Pull threads to the front, pull them through the back so that it locks those threads in place. And now I'm going to go ahead and tie this off. Let's see, I missed my thread. There we go. And it looks like I did a pretty darn good job of getting the edge of that fabric on my hem. It doesn't look like there's anything I need to really trim underneath. So that's always a nice way to finish your hemming, is by flipping the garment inside out and seeing if there's any extra hem that you could trim. For example, there's this little piece right here. Just creates a neater finish, especially if you're either selling the garment or if you're sewing it for somebody else. But the rest of it looks pretty darn good. So I am off to press this, and we'll be back with a final reveal of the modeled Amelia shirt I just made. All right, so here is my final Amelia shirt done in a sweater net. It is wonderfully cozy for fall, and I'll also be able to layer it for winter. So I want to thank you for joining me. You can of course play this video back anytime that you sew an Amelia. Stay tuned for springtime, and I will do an add-on video for the cold shoulder option for this particular design. And I am actually off to, I combined the wine for my pattern weights to cut out my fabric, and now it's time for me to enjoy this next to a fire in my cozy Amelia shirt. Bye everyone!